Today we're going to learn two more clauses that take the subjunctive, and these are called clauses of hindering and preventing and indirect commands, and they are really pretty straightforward. In some ways they're a lot easier than purpose and result clauses, and now that you have that background, I think these are going to seem really easy and obvious to you. But let's take a look. So these two kinds of clauses, indirect commands and clauses of hindering and preventing, are a lot like purpose clauses because, like them, they follow the sequence of tenses. So these are clauses that take a subjunctive and they only take the present or the imperfect subjunctive, just like purpose and result clauses do, because these are, they follow command words, so you're really telling somebody that you want them to do something, and so, but you're not sure that they're going to do it, or you're trying to stop someone from doing something and you're not sure they're going to stop. And so, like our clauses of purpose and result, they really only refer to present or future action. So the same rules that we've been using apply here. Let's look at indirect commands first. You might think of indirect commands as more like a kind of petition or request rather than an order. And because, as I said, the outcome is uncertain, we use the subjunctive. So they are always introduced by a verb of commanding or requesting, and so that's always a tip-off. If you see a verb like that in your sentence as the main verb, you might think to yourself, aha, I probably have an indirect command coming up. Just like purpose and result clauses, just like purpose clauses, we use ut for the positive and ne for the negative. So you might think you would get these confused, but you really won't, because when you see that verb that says I command, or he begs, or she requests, you're going to know that what you have coming up is an indirect command. Occasionally, ut is omitted. But this is really, again, not a cause for confusion, because you're going to have that verb as your main verb that means something like beg, request, ask, command, order, and that's going to tell you that you have an indirect command. So they tend to be pretty obvious. And let's look at some. So these are the most common verbs that trigger an indirect command. These verbs of commanding or ordering or requesting, they're in your book, so you can learn them if you don't already know all of them. And you can see that they mean things like urge or encourage, order, beg, pray, ask, warn, right? We know this one very well. Persuade, urge, seek. So all of these kinds of words, right? I ask you to do something. I beg you to do something. I persuade you to do something. I warn you to do something. I implore you to do something. Imploring doesn't seem like a command, but you can see that you're really trying to convince someone in all of these situations to do something, and you can't be sure that they're actually going to do what you want them to do. I would draw your attention to a couple of words in particular that are kind of special. The verb impero, which is a pretty common verb that means to order, and persuadeo and suadeo. These verbs take a dative. So you order someone or you persuade someone in the dative. And these final two verbs, peto and quairo, which really mean to seek or to ask, you seek things from people or you ask from people. Peto and quairo take an ablative after ab. So this is instead of an accusative. So you want to memorize those, but the rest of these verbs just take an accusative. Let's look at some examples. I think this will make it really clear. So you can see, here's our first example, tibi oro ut me iues, right? I beg to you to help me. I beg you to help me. I implore that, right? That's our ut, that you help me. So you can see, in English, we tend to translate these kinds of phrases with an infinitive. right? To help. But just as with purpose clauses, Latin likes to have this ut or ne construction and then a verb in the subjunctive. So I beg you to help me. I implore that you help me. Here's a second example. This one is in, you can see, secondary sequence. So here we have an imperfect subjunctive following a verb in the perfect, right? Mihi persuasit ne venirem. He persuaded me not to come. So here's that ne, not to come. He persuaded me that I not come. So there you can see it works exactly the same way. You can translate it either way, whichever one seems more natural to you, whichever one is easier for you. You can also see, right, when you see a verb like this, oro, persuasit, right, persuade, beg, implore, you know right off the bat that somebody is begging you to do something, is trying to persuade you to do something. That's the way these verbs work, both in English and Latin, and so you're likely to have an indirect command following it. And here, the final one, I just wanted to show you that just as with our other sentences where the perfect can be translated as have and be followed by a present subjunctive, right, in primary sequence, right, we can do that with these two. So the same sentence can be mihi persuasit ne veniam. He has persuaded me not to come. That is today, right now, not yesterday in the past. The translation, as you can see, is really not going to change. It's really just understanding what time we're talking about. And obviously context would matter in those situations. But because this is a present subjunctive, we know it's primary sequence, and so we have to translate this with have. Okay? But that's really all there is to indirect commands. Command verb plus ut or ne plus subjunctives following sequence of tenses, just as you have been doing. There are two special verbs, eubeo and veto. Eubeo means to order, veto means to forbid. So they are opposites, right? Antonyms. And these two verbs are special because instead of taking an indirect command, they take what you would want them to take, which is an accusative and an infinitive. So these are the only two verbs that work this way, and so we just need to remember that, especially when we're translating, so that we're not anticipating the wrong thing. So you can see I've given you a couple of examples here, right? Me iubet oppidum oppugnare, right? He orders me to besiege the town. Oppugnare, oppidum. So here you actually get that to besiege, oppugnare. He orders me, me, right? That's exactly what you would want to see. The opposite, for the opposite we use veto. So me vetat oppidum oppugnare. He forbids me to besiege the town. So we never say non eubeo, instead we say veto. Okay, veto is where we get the English word veto, right? Because when a president vetoes legislation, he forbids it from going into the public. So, but this is the only exception that we really have to indirect commands. Now, clauses of hindering and preventing are similar in that they follow the same kind of sequence of tenses using either the present or the imperfect subjunctive, and they are introduced by verbs that describe some kind of hindering or preventing. That is, the subject of that verb is trying to stop someone from doing something. And so the outcome is uncertain. You hope that they'll stop doing whatever it is you want them not to do, but you can't be sure of it. And so that's why we use the subjunctive. And just like indirect commands, they are introduced by special verbs that indicate that you're hindering or preventing someone. Now, because you're always trying to stop someone, you almost always, and it's hard for me to think of an example, honestly, that isn't negative, but these are going to be introduced by negative markers, right? Because you're going to stop someone from doing something. You want to stop them lest they do something. And so you're likely to see not ut, but ne. And this is really regular, okay? Now, you can also use quominus or quin, and these are just synonyms of ne. So they mean exactly the same thing, and they indicate that you want something not to happen. And these can be, especially these two, right, can be good hints too that you have a clause of hindering or preventing. Since, of course, we don't use those for purpose clauses, right? Ne is more ambiguous. We can use it for a lot of things, but quominus and quin would tell you off the bat pretty much that you've got a clause of hindering or preventing. So you can see that these are some verbs that introduce these kinds of clauses. And you can see that verbs like obsto, deterreo, prohibeo, retineo, interdico, resisto, impedio. And they mean things hinder, impede, deter, prevent, restrain, hold back, forbid, resist. So things that are trying to stop people from doing things. I'm going to hinder you from doing something. I'll deter you from doing something. I'll prevent you from doing something. You can see that in English, almost all of these verbs, we say from. And so that is maybe the best translation of something like ne or quin or quominus. But we can see that you can also use lest if you want to, and sort of give a fuller form of the verb. So let's take a look at some examples. Right, so here I've used in the first example, this is primary sequence. And you can see I'm using prohibeo. And so our verb here is in the present subjunctive. Me prohibet ne veritatem dicam. He prevents me from speaking the truth. So there is our from, ne, right? And here, right, dicam, I'm really translating here as a participle, right? He prevents me from speaking the truth. But if you want to use lest, right, that's okay. And then you can give sort of the full form of the verb. He prevents me lest I speak the truth. So he prevents me from speaking the truth. He prevents me lest I speak the truth. It comes down to the same thing. You can use whichever one is easier and makes more sense to you. The same thing happens in secondary sequence, right? It's just that now we have a verb in the perfect, and so our verb in our clause will be in the imperfect subjunctive. Miles deterruisti quin hostes pugnarent. You deterred the enemies from fighting, or you deterred the soldiers from fighting the enemy. Quin hostes pugnarent. Or you deterred the enemies lest they fight the enemy. I'm sorry, the soldiers. You deterred the soldiers lest they fight the enemy. Right? So in either case, you can use from plus an ing, or you can use this word lest, and then you can just translate the verb normally with subject and verb. And that's it. And again, these aren't really confusing or hard to identify because you're always going to have a verb like obsto, deterreo, prohibeo, right? Prevent, deter, impede, something like that that's going to make it crystal clear what kind of clause is coming up. So finally, summing up, we use the sequence of tenses with these two new types of clauses, clauses of hindering and preventing, and indirect commands. But we only use the present or the imperfect because they, just like purpose and result clauses, are only showing future time. For indirect commands, we use ut ne, and so that's going to look really familiar, but we're not going to confuse them at all with purpose clauses because we have that command verb. So as soon as you see a verb like impero or persuadeo or something, you're going to know, oh, this is an indirect command. I'm all over this, right? Likewise, clauses of hindering and preventing really only appear in the negative, and so you're going to see these words ne, quin, and quo minus, and those would tip you off, especially when you think about having a verb like deterreo, prohibeo. That's going to say, aha, I know, I'm preventing or stopping someone from doing something, and so that's going to be pretty obvious too. The only exceptions to this are these two verbs, eubeo and weto, which take an accusative plus infinitive construction. And we never say non eubeo. We always say weto, and we would not say non weto, we would say eubeo, right? So they are antonyms, and we use one or the other. And that's it. It is really pretty straightforward. So send me your questions, up to 3 questions, and we'll go over any problems that you might have with these, but I think the biggest thing is familiarizing yourself with these new verbs for the ones that are new, and making sure that you know what words introduce these 2 different clauses, and then you're going to be good to go. There's really nothing tricky here. Okay.